In your briefings with the president and his team this morning, what will be the message at 1 p.m.?
The first and most important message that the president will deliver in his remarks is really about the United States' long-standing and continued support of Israel, of the people of Israel. Our sympathies, obviously, with the loss and the suffering and the shock that they're going through, but also our firm resolve to make sure that they can continue to defend themselves against these terrorist attacks and to take action against Hamas directly. So he will talk about the military assistance that we are providing and that we expect to have to provide going forward. Number two, he'll talk about the hostage situation and the crisis and the fear that that is also engendering in so many hearts and minds throughout the region, including here in the United States, and what the United States might be willing to do to help with the hostage recovery efforts. And then lastly, and this is not unimportant at all, it's a strong message for Americans here at home that that anti-Semitism has no place, neither does terrorism, and that the United States federal government will work with state and local authorities to make sure that our Jewish community throughout the country doesn't have to live in fear and anguish and anxiety, that we're going to make sure that we can look after Jewish community centers and places of worship.
John Kirby, from an Israel template, there's 67 and 73, and they were very different. To bring it to your Navy, Admiral Zumwalt didn't have to worry about social media. The immediacy, the speed of news today. How will this effort of Israel and the assistance of the United States change because of this modern news cycle, that crushing visibility of the terror that we have seen?
Yeah, I mean, you can't have a conflict today anymore where it's not being brought home to people in real time, in micro bits of information and imagery, and it really gives you a gut punch because it's right in front of your face, and everywhere you turn, you gotta feel like you have to react to it. It is really important in a crisis like this, particularly when information is so ubiquitous and so accelerated, that when appropriate, you gotta make sure you're slowing down and making the right policy decisions, that you're acting not so much in reaction to what's in the news environment, but what you actually need to do on the field of battle or in the information space. Make no mistake, and we saw this in 2014 in the Gaza war, the information, the narrative war was just as important as the bombs that were dropping and the explosions that were going off. That will be even more the case here in terms of making sure that, that there is a common set of narratives about who's at fault here, who are the victims, and what needs to be done to move this forward.
John Kirby, there's been a lot of discussion around the $6 billion that the U.S. released unfroze, I should say, for Tehran. It has not been released yet. I've seen some of the comments that you and others have made in the administration saying that not a penny of it's actually been transferred. However, what is the discussion around refreezing it? How likely and realistic is it that this administration will refreeze that $6 billion?
We don't have a policy decision on that to speak to right now. It has always been the case that money could be frozen at any time. We said that when we sent it over to Qatar and made it available to the Iranians. It's also important to remember that the regime, even though none of it's been spent yet, but even if some had been, the regime never sees a dime of it. They never get their hands on it. It goes right to vendors that we approve, who buy the humanitarian goods and ship them into Iran for direct access to the Iranian people. The regime will never see a cent of this.
A lot of people have said that this is sort of just a distraction from the real issue, which is that essentially Iran is getting a ton of money through the exports of oil, particularly to China, despite sanctions, and the sanctions have been somewhat lightened. How much is the U.S. talking about enforcing the sanctions in a more significant way, or the ineffectiveness of those sanctions?
I would push back a little bit on the idea that sanctions have been lightened. We have not lightened any of the sanctions. In fact, we've added additional sanctions, some 400 sanctions on Iran just since the beginning of this administration. And we're absolutely committed to full and total enforcement. Now, obviously, other nations have to enforce their sanctions as well, and certainly we talk with them about that. But the United States has not backed off on any sanctions. Quite the contrary, we've added and increased our enforcement capability. Not to mention, we have increased our military presence in the Gulf Gulf region and now, of course, in the Eastern Med to deter would-be actors like Iran who might want to try to take advantage of this situation.
So far, there's been a distinction drawn by both U.S. and Israeli officials saying that while it is clear that Iran has been involved in backing Hamas financially, it is unclear whether they were directly involved in orchestrating this particular attack. What is the difference from a policy perspective? What would the U.S. do and Israel do should Iran be determined to have been intimately connected with orchestrating this attack?
I won't get into speculating about what policy decisions we might or might not make based on where the information and the intelligence leads us. All I can do is reiterate what we've been saying. We haven't seen any specific tactical intelligence or information evidence that points to Iran's participation in these particular attacks. Now, clearly, and we've made no bones about it, that there is already and has been for a long time a degree of complicity by Iran here because they've been supporting Hamas for many years. Training, capabilities, resourcing, certainly rhetorically in just the last 24 hours, the supreme leaders out there praising this attack by Hamas. So there's a degree of complicity, but we just haven't found any direct evidence. And quite frankly, neither have our Israeli counterparts.
Admiral Kirby, with great respect, and I don't want you to give away the family secrets, but the conventional effort is like a Boeing, the Sentry E-3 intelligence aircraft, where you put a couple of them up in the air and gather intelligence. This is 2 million people in a highly urban landscape squeezed into a geography that is 2 Washington, D.C.s. How do you prosecute intelligence against an enemy sandwiched in among 2 million people?
Very difficult to do. I won't speak for the Israelis. Of course, this is really for them to talk about. We will obviously and continue to share intelligence with them and offer them help in intelligence gathering. Of course we will. We always do. But it'll be a task really for them to work on. But it is very difficult, very dense, very, as you said, urban, and very, very heavily populated. And Hamas, this is just another example of their barbarity, using Palestinians that live in Gaza as human shields, hiding in mosques and residential buildings and hospitals as command centers. I mean, this is what makes it very, very difficult for precise targeting.
Admiral, one final question, and I must speak to the Navy. The Gerald Ford is in the area. Is it properly staffed? Is this a U.S. Navy that can develop the manpower, the sea power to staff not only that aircraft carrier, but the many other ships involved?
Yeah, the Gerald Ford Care Strike Group is now in the Eastern Mediterranean. As you rightly said, it's not just the aircraft carrier and the embarked air wing of more than 80 aircraft, but it is several ships and around it in its periphery. They are all fully manned. They're all fully trained. They're all fully ready and fully armed to look after American national security interests in the region. That was one of the messages that the president wanted to send by moving those forces there, that nobody should take advantage of the situation in Israel, and that the United States will always make sure that our national security interests are first and foremost as well.